What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the third person and action RPG tutorial series, we are going to be going over NPCs. So I have this paladin character right here, and I can go up to them and interact with them to cause them to perform a gesture. Now in the future, of course, we will be able to talk from them, receive quests from them, or do whatever else that we want to do with them. But just the fact that we can get them interacting with our character here is a really good sign. I'm really excited to get an NPC system in our game here so that we can further our progress. I'm really loving how everything is coming together. Of course, this character model could be changed out for anyone, and we could do whatever logic on any NPC that we want. This is the base NPC, but as we go along through the series, we're going to make many custom NPCs. For those that may not know, NPC stands for non-playable character, and essentially it is just a character in the game that isn't one of the main characters. They can walk around, have quests, you can speak to them, all these different things, but you can't play as them. Now, if you want to get caught up in the series before you check out this episode, you can see how we've done everything from our equipment, our weapons and armor, our enemies, hitboxes, and great things like that. I'll link you to the top right corner of this episode right here for the playlist on the entire third-person action RPG series, so you can check those things out and get to what you see on screen here. Alternatively, if you don't care about that and you only care about NPCs, that's perfectly fine. I am going to link this episode right here in the top right corner, which is where we went over interactions in this series. We are going to be able to interact with NPCs in a similar way that we could interact with items, like picking them up off the ground and such. In this case, we'll be talking to them, or in this episode, just making them gestures so that we know we've done it correctly. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We are going to start in the code today, and then we'll go to the blueprint. So first thing we need to do is have an actual class for our NPCs, and I'm calling that my base NPC class. We're going to make it a C++ class, so I'm going to go in my content browser to the C++ classes section. In my third person tutorial folder, right click, new C++ class. In here, I'm selecting character, but you could select a standard actor or a pawn. I'm going to have character because I want the NPCs to have as much freedom as possible for now. If you don't need the entire freedom of a character on your NPC, of course you could change it, but really it's not going to make a huge difference either way, so I recommend just sticking with character. For the name, you can call it whatever you want. Again, I called mine base NPC, so when I type it in, it already exists for me, it won't for you. Then you can go ahead and hit create class. Once you do that, it will create the class in Visual Studio. Will likely bring you there on its own, bring you here, show you the new classes that got made. But if for any reason it doesn't, you can find your new files in the source folder. So here is my solution in Visual Studio. Here is my source folder. Here's my third person tutorial folder. And now I have base npc.h and base npc.cpp. If you are launching the editor from Visual Studio like I am, then you will likely have to close, or it will ask you to reload the environment. Reloading works fine. Since I've already created them, I'm going to close to go over the code with you, but as long as you see these files here in your project, you should be good to go. Now we're going to go through both these base NPC files, and it's going to be pretty much everything already filled out when you create them, so you're not going to have to add much today. This is just our base class. We just want to add variables and functions that all of our NPCs are going to have. When this file was created, everything that you see here is already going to be in the file, as well as everything that you see in this highlight. So those two highlighted sections are all things that should be in the file when it gets created. I added some other things that I will go over in a few minutes, but everything else in there you should already have. They could be slightly different due to engine version and things like that, but it will be very similar. Now that's the base npc.h. Let's go to base npc.cpp. Again, I'm going to highlight the sections for what you should have. So everything in here you should have when you create your base npc file, as well as everything in here. So if I didn't highlight it yet, then it should not have been created. We're going to add it today. So assuming you have all that stuff, you are good to go. Now let's go back to the base npc.h and actually add the behavior we want for today. First things first, we are going to add this NPC to a scene. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I can interact with it. If I can interact with it, then we can do dialogue, we can do quests, progression, all these different things in the future. but we absolutely need to be able to interact with the NPC in one way or another, and that's what we're going to be covering today. So the first thing I want to do is add a variable, and that variable is going to be called isInteracting. Essentially, if the NPC is interacting with the character, or really any character, but in our case it's just going to be our playable character for now, we are going to say that isInteracting is true. Otherwise, it's going to be false. So I have a boolean isInteracting, and I've made it a U property so that we can edit it and access it in the blueprint. So it's U property, blueprint read write, edit anywhere, with a category of NPC. I've also made two functions. They're going to enter the interaction state with the NPC, so when the player interacts with them, we'll go into some sort of state, whether it's just talking to them or whatever it may be. And then we have exit interaction, so either when we press a button to end the interaction or the interaction automatically ends, say that they are finished talking and we're ready to go back to the gameplay, we're going to call exit interaction. So we're making two functions, void enter interaction and void exit interaction. They're both U function and they're both blueprint callable, so we can call them in the blueprint. Our interaction system is in blueprint right now. In my other series, I have transferred them over to code, and this series is going to be no different. We are going to handle our interactions in code. One little thing that I like to do with all my classes is organize it a little bit differently than how Epic organized their files by default. Specifically with the public protected and public identifiers they have here. I don't want to have public protected and public. There's nothing wrong with that, but in small files like this, I like to organize it a little bit differently. So I'm going to take everything that's in public. I'm going to delete the bottom public, and I'm just going to move it up here to the top public. Not required, but I'm just showing you that I'm doing that. Now, if we go to the base npc.cpp, we want to go to the constructor, which is our first function here, and this is where we set our default values for variables. In here, I want to set isInteracting to be false, because when the NPC is spawned, the constructor will fire, and at that point, the NPC should not be interacting with anything. So we're going to say isInteracting is false. The other thing we need to do is add our two functions, enter interaction and exit interaction. So let's go over this one more time. So enter interaction is going to be interaction has begun with this NPC. Interaction has ended with this NPC. Right? So if we make these functions void a base NPC colon colon enter interaction and void a base NPC colon colon exit interaction, really all we need to do right now is set our boolean to be true or false. There's a lot more we're going to need to do with it in the future, but setting isInteracting to be true or false is going to be enough for now. So in enter interaction, we set isInteracting to be true. In exit interaction, we set isInteracting to be false. With this done, we can go ahead and launch the editor again. Once we are back in the editor, we need to make a blueprint class for our NPC. That blueprint class is going to hold things like our skeletal mesh so that we can spawn them and see them in the level. So go to wherever you want to create this. I'm going to go to my blueprints, and I made a folder called NPCs, and I'm going to make an NPC Paladin BP. So I'm going to add a new blueprint class. I'm now going to go to all classes down at the bottom and search for it. So we want to search for base NPC. We'll select this one, and then we'll hit select. When you do that, you'll get your blueprint class here, and you'll just have to name it. Again, mine is NPC underscore Paladin BP. Once we have our character blueprint, you can go into it, and this is my blueprint. You can't see my mesh because I don't have any data in the event graph, so it kind of hides it, but you can always hit open full blueprint editor if you need to. And you'll see something like this. You'll see I don't have any nodes in my event graph, nothing like that today. And then I have, in my viewport, you can see this paladin right here. This is something I set up, and don't worry, we're going to be going over it. But this character by default will have a mesh component, and we need to fill out that mesh component. To do this, we need to have a mesh to fill it with. I went on Mixamo, and I got a character. So in art, characters, NPCs, paladin, I have imported a skeletal mesh from Mixamo, and it looks like this. So this is my knight character, my paladin character. This is what we imported. Then I also imported an idle animation using that skeletal mesh, so he's just kind of swaying back and forth while he's breathing. And I have an NPC interact, which is what they look like when you're interacting with them. So once you have your character in the engine that you want, you can go back to your blueprint and you can look on your mesh for this skeletal mesh asset. And you'll pick your skeleton. So I'm picking my NPC underscore paladin. Now, when you do this, the paladin will just be T-posing because they can't actually play any animations or anything like that right now. We have to go and make an animation blueprint. So I'm going to go to my blueprints, and a BP, and I'm going to add a new one in here. Animation blueprint. When you do that, again, you'll get this anim BP. You'll have to select your skeleton that you want. In fact, I'll do that with you. So when you do this, you're going to want to pick your skeleton. Mine is called paladin skeleton underscore skeleton. This is from the Mixmo import, so nothing weird happening here. Just make sure you pick the right skeleton and then hit create. Now go into your animation blueprint and we will go out to the anim graph. This is likely where you will start in your animation blueprint. The anim graph is where you can link state machines together and pass them through to your full output pose. This is what we want to do. So when you come in here, you won't have anything in here. You won't even have a regular state machine. You can right click and search for state machine and select this one right here. This will create a new one for you and you can plug it into the result. I already have one and I called it default. By the way, you can click on a state machine and change the name at any point right here. I'm going to delete the new state machine we made because I have my default, but once you have your state machine and it's named what you want, you can go into it. So now we have our actual states within the state machine. You will always have this entry node, and this is where the state machine begins. For this very simple example, we are only going to have two states for the NPC, idle and interact. For the idle state, we want them to be playing their idle animation, their breathing, swaying animation, whatever you want to call it. So let's make an idle state, right click, add state, and you can call it idle. I've already got mine here. You can see there's no events on it or anything, nothing tricky. Double click to go into the state. And we have this output animation pose. We just need to plug an animation into it. So we have our NPC idle right here in the asset browser. And literally drag it in, and there you go. Here is my NPC idle. Now, we do want to make sure this animation loops. So make sure loop animation is checked because we want them to keep looping through their idle animation. We want the interaction state as well. That's our other state here. So we can right click and add a state again. This one we'll call interact. Then we can drag from idle to interact and interact back to idle. Each time we do that, we will create a transition rule, which is this little arrow. So literally click and drag just like this. And in the idle to interact transition rule, we can go in there and we need to check to see if this NPC is interacting or not. To figure this out, we need to know who the owner of the animation blueprint is, what class they are, and what condition we want. So let's stay here, but let's take a step back. Let's go back to our NPC Paladin BP. So this is my character blueprint. I want to select my mesh. I want to go to my details panel. I want to make sure the animation mode is set to use animation blueprint, and I want the anim class to now be the new animation blueprint that I made, which is NPC underscore anim BP. And it's right here in the list. Once I do that, the character should start playing their idle animation. So now what we need to do is go back to the animation blueprint, and we need to go to the event graph. If you don't have this tab here, you can find it right here, event graph. And we're going to set up this very small event to actually get the owner of the animation blueprint, which is going to be our character BP. So we're going to search for event blueprint initialize animation. That is this node right here. So once the animation is officially initialized, that means we're ready to start playing the state machine for this animation blueprint. And at that point, I want to grab my owner of the NMBP and set it as a variable in here. To do this, we can right click and type get owning actor, which will literally get the owning actor of this anim BP. And since it was created on the character BP, it's going to automatically be set to that character BP. The actor could be many different classes, so we do have to cast it to the type that we want, which is going to be base NPC. And then you can drag off the as base NPC node and type promote to variable, and you could make a new variable. You'll get this node that you see right here. Now, if you don't want to do it that way, you could also make a new variable manually. Just hit plus variable, change the type to be your base NPC type, object reference, drag it, and set it. So for me, I have as base NPC, but I'm actually going to rename that. I'm going to call it base NPC ref. So base NPC ref is my variable to the owner of this animation blueprint. Basically, the character that we should be checking for conditions like if they're interacting or not. And if they are, we want to play a certain animation. So this is what my event graph looks like. Let's go back to the state machine. And let's go back to the idle to interact transition rule. And here, we want to grab our base NPC ref and get it. Now at this point, we should have access to everything that we have exposed to the blueprint, such as our is interacting boolean. We want to get that, and we want to pass that into the result. If this NPC is interacting with the playable character, we can transition from idle to the interact state. So that's our first transition rule. Now, to transition back from interact to idle, we can go into this one, and we're going to do the exact opposite. Basically, if the character is no longer interacting with the NPC, then we can return to idle. So same transition rule as before, except drag off of it and type not boolean, just like that. And you'll get this little node that you see here. Pass that into the result. Now, this system is very simple, because all we have to do is call enter interaction, and we'll set that is interacting boolean to true, and call exit interaction, and we'll set it to false. So the last thing we need to do is go into our character blueprint, specifically our playable character blueprint, not our NPC blueprint. So I'm going to my third person character, which is my base character BP, and I'm going to go to my event interact BP. This was set up in our interaction episodes. I am going to add on to that today, but if you're watching this episode standalone, you don't have to have the logic that's in here. All this logic that was in here before was for our items. I have new logic today right here, which is much simpler, and so our old system will work with it, but if you don't have that, you don't need to add these other nodes that I'm not talking about today. Now, for the case of everyone who has this logic for our interaction for our items, we were getting all our overlapping actors of type default item, then we were casting it and grabbing the item type and all these cool things. We don't have to worry about that right now. The only thing we care about is the overlapping NPCs. It works for now. It's going to be better to have a bigger area so we don't have to directly be touching the NPC, or we could use a hit scan or a line trace to actually determine if we were looking at the NPC. So that is something we're going to be going over. Don't worry about that. That's a simple change in the future once we have that system, but that's going to be in its own episode. So after the for each loop, on completed of the overlapping actors of type default item, I added some new logic down here below, which is what's highlighted. So I've done another get overlapping actors, and I'm going to search for my base NPC class. I'm going to drag off of the overlapping actors and type for each loop. Then I'm going to drag off the array element, so we're looping through all of our NPCs that we're overlapping with, but we need to still cast that type to be base NPC. That way we can actually grab the appropriate data and call the appropriate functions. So that's how I got these three nodes right here. Then we want to drag off of the base NPC and get our is interacting boolean. So if is interacting is true. That means we are exiting the interaction. We're already in one. We press the interact button. We want to exit. If it is false, we are entering the interaction. We're not in one. We're pressing the interact button. We want to start one. So I bring is interacting into a branch. And then I drag off my base NPC and call enter interaction and exit interaction. On true, exit. On false, enter. So now our Boolean will be set properly when we press the interact button if we're overlapping with our NPC, which basically just means we are standing directly up against them right now. Now, once our character or our NPC is set up, we can go ahead and drag him into the scene. So go to where your character blueprint is for your NPC, and then just literally drag him into the level. And when you play, the NPC will be there. So we're going to go ahead and play now and demonstrate what we implemented. We have to directly be touching the actual character, but once you are, you should be able to interact with them and they will get sent to this state. Now, at the end of the animation, after interacting with them, they will get stuck in that animation until you press interact again, then they will return to idle. And that's how you'll know that you've done it correctly. So anyway, this is the first part of NPCs. As long as we have an NPC that we can interact with, making the system better is really, really simple and really fun. I'm very excited to get into more of this. If you're excited as well and you want to support the channel, then please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to all my YouTube membership, Patreon supporters, Discord supporters that have already supported my channel and these series. Thank you guys so much. You keep these series alive and I'm incredibly grateful for your support. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description and I would be happy to help you. Anyway guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.